Welcome to MacroHive Conversations with Bilal Hafiz. MacroHive helps educate investors and provide investment insights for all markets from crypto to equities to bonds. For our latest views, visit macrohive.com. Greetings and welcome, Frank. It's fantastic to have you on the podcast show.
Oh, Bilal, this is, I'm very grateful. Thank you very much. I'm a huge fan and it was great to work with you years ago, watch you ever since grow MacroHive to where it is now. I see you on Bloomberg and elsewhere all the time. So it's a real honor to be here.
No, great. Thanks for those words, Frank. And maybe before we go into the meat of our conversation, I do like to ask all of my guests something about their origin story. So it'd be great to hear about what you studied at university, and then was your move into politics early on and then into finance later, still with a political lens. Was that all inevitable or not? What are some of your key career milestones as well?
No, nothing was inevitable. I still sort of wake up here at the age of 60 thinking, how did I get here? I grew up in Washington. I'm at least fifth generation Washingtonian and third generation person involved in politics. My grandfather was a mega lobbyist. He represented all the sugar growers of Latin America and the Caribbean when we used to import sugar into the US. My father, after a career in the Marine Corps, worked on Capitol Hill in the US Senate on defense and intelligence related things for 30 years. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And I had gone, but I wanted to get out of here. Everybody was either Georgetown or Naval Academy, the competition. So somehow I conned my parents into letting me go to the University of San Francisco, complete opposite side of the US, which had a marvelous small great books program. So I studied the classics. I'm not mathematically inclined at all. I came back and thought I'd go to law school, and I got waitlisted at Georgetown Law School, got to number one on the list because of family connections, I'll be honest. And in that summer beforehand, I got a very glamorous job changing light bulbs in the US Senate and for the electrical shop, literally walking around with a box with light bulbs, that's a little too bright on you. Why don't we do with it? Literally, I said, do that all day. And I ran into a friend in the hallway one day who just graduated from Yale, and he looked at me as if what happened? And he literally first, what happened to you? And I go stuttering, I think I'm going to go to law school, blah, 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 blah. He said, you were the editor of the school newspaper. Yeah, I love to write. I love to write. That's funny. Our boss here at the committee just got a call from the White House. They're looking for writers for President Reagan. Would you be interested? And I was 22 years old. And I said, sure.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's quite an offer for the president.
I thought it was going to go nowhere. And he said, get me a resume. So I went home and banged out one on a typewriter, brought it in the next day. And through the wonders of technology known as faxing, he faxed it down. And when I got home that day from work, a phone call came in from the White House. Would you come in and interview tomorrow? And 2 days later, I got hired doing Ronald Reagan's personal correspondence.
Wow. That's quite amazing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then from that point onwards, so then effectively you were part of White House staff, I suppose, from a job perspective. So you were kind of into politics at that point then.
Well, I'll just be perfectly honest. In high school, I graduated the bottom 12 of my class. I was a terrible student. And when I went to ask the lovely, she was a sweet nun, who was a guidance counselor, would you write me a letter of recommendation of university? She said, I remember her desk was pristine. She opened her drawer and she pulled out a brochure and slid it across to me. And it was an application to go to diesel mechanic school. And she wouldn't write me letters. She said, this isn't right for you, which I loved going back 4.5 years later and handing her my business card, writer for the President of the United States on White House, right? It was great. But look, I was White House staff for Reagan, and then I went on to work in his, after a year and a half of writing, was promoted into the Office of Political Affairs, which was the political unit, getting him to campaign for Bush and other people. And I did that. And then because I did so much helping the Bush campaign, was asked to stay on in transition and stayed at the George Bush Sr. White House for a year and a half. Went to the Justice Department after that to be a speechwriter and aide to the Attorney General, Bill Barr, of Trump years, but he had been Attorney General under Bush. Then the Securities and Exchange Commission, where I was the chief spokesman and senior policy advisor to the chairman. And that really blew my mind in terms of markets. And I loved it. And that's where I really fell in love with investment banking, finance, and everything else. And then parlayed that, I was recruited to become chief of staff and head of global marketing at Merrill Lynch's investment banking and trading unit under the late, great Herb Allison. And I got to know so many of our colleagues from Deutsche Bank who were Merrill guys, including a very young Anshu Jain today, Seth
Wow.
Wan. And then I was off. There we go. Then on to Charles Schwab and then to Deutsche Bank.
Okay, great. That's fantastic. So essentially you've got insights from both sides, from the inside the politics side of how they think, and then also from the private sector side of how the private sector interfaces into politics as well. So both sides of the divide.
Mostly Schwab, and certainly my 20 plus years at Deutsche Bank, where I was called upon because I was set up the Washington office, overseeing regulation, government affairs, helping on CFIUS, the merger review panels and things like that. So I got pulled actually into deals. I'd go out and do pitches with these guys, and it forced, day in and day out. And then the trading desks, and working with you and other economists back in the day. What's going on here? How is this going to impact the markets? Should markets be worried about this? This is an opportunity. And I did this day in and day out for the better part of 20 years. It was probably 80% of what I did, just policy, global affairs, and the impact on markets. And I love it. And that's my own firm.
That's fantastic. Yeah, and you're doing super, super well in your new firm. And I urge people to go to your site to have a look at it. Now, I did want to talk obviously about politics. There's a lot going on at the moment. We've had the US elections. Trump has been re-elected, which is, is unprecedented at so many different levels. Actually, first thing, given that you mentioned Reagan and Bush Sr., people keep saying Trump's unprecedented. He's like so different from anyone in the past. When you compare him to, say, Reagan and Bush Sr. from that era, how different is he compared to them? Or maybe put another way, are there any similarities with those presidents?
I would say two things. There was sort of a sense, certainly Ronald Reagan being a movie star in his earlier career, right? There was a sense of, shouldn't be saying this about a democracy, but there was a regal aspect to the Reagan White House. And certainly with the very patrician George H.W. Bush, the same way. Look, politics was brutal. It was brutal with Reagan, the Iran-Contra affair. They went hard after Bush. It's not softball. But it was very different. But I would also say both of them were, particularly Reagan, massive reformers, right? In terms of, and why they got elected. People just got sick of things, and they wanted something of a quote unquote revolutionary, if you want to put it on that, in terms of regulation and tax and the economy. And so well back in the days of what were interest rates when Reagan got elected, and Paul Volcker, right? We're kind of revisiting this history-wise. And Trump's a very different guy, but I think he's tougher. Let's call him. He can be quite vulgar, but people want that. And I think they feel a need for that. Not that I'm condoning it, but they wanted somebody who was going to come in and just go hard at Washington. And there's the difference. And again, look what he's talking about. The same issues: taxes, regulation, immigration was a huge issue. Last time we ever had an immigration reform bill in the United States of any consequence, it was in the Reagan White House.
Yep, that's a fantastic point. Yeah. It's important to remember that. I think sometimes people think that Trump is doing something very different from the Republican tradition, but in many ways he's extending it. And on the election itself, I'll just ask you straight. I mean, why did Trump win? Why did Harris lose?
Well, as I think I've told you, I do a lot of speaking, particularly in the Midwest. So I spend a lot of time talking to various non-financial groups. I get brought in to talk to conventions of gas station owners, 2,000 of them say. I had fascinating experience in Minnesota doing that 6 months ago. They felt that Washington had lost touch, and the anger levels. And it wasn't necessarily the things that you and I would think, right? they didn't like the sense of regulation. I'll tell you one of the more fascinating things. I did this, like I just mentioned. I spoke to a convention of gas station / convenience store owners, 3,000 of them. And some of these, big business, right? Some of these guys have 10, 20 of these things. It's a lot of money they make. And then some of them are just mom and pop things. Anger over the regulation of menthol cigarettes was off the charts. I heard it for 3 days I was there, right? Because this is what poorer people can afford. They like it. And Biden was trying to get rid of it. The biggest thing was inflation, that there was still inflation, and you had the president coming out and saying, we're licking inflation. It's getting, no, they didn't feel it. And I'll say from a historical perspective, Bilal, because you would really, I think, get this. It's been so long since we had experienced inflation. What I kept getting from people was clearly a misunderstanding of what inflation was. Bread is now double the price. When is it going to come back to what it was? Butter twice the price, right? And then they'd correlate that to gas prices, which of course are always going up and down. And you're sort of like, well, wait a minute, that's disinflation, and they're right. They didn't understand it because they hadn't experienced it. And if they did, they were old, because it was, last time was Volcker and Jimmy Carter and Reagan. So I think that was part of it. I think the other big thing was they felt that there was that Washington had really become insular, and to put direct color on that, boy, were they mad, and people really angry at that second debate. That debate between Trump and Biden, where Biden was just a mess.
Yeah.
Wait, what? We've heard these rumors. It's clear there's been a cover-up. And there's no other word, right? And I had seen it here for years. And you're like, people are not going to respond well to that. And then it was the switcheroo. Oh, we're going to put Kamala in there. Wait, what? No. We're starting anew, right? If a corporation did this, could you imagine what investors would do? The lawsuits, right? The hostile, this is exactly what happened. You don't understand what's happening to us in the rank and file, the average American, and you're playing these games to stay. Nope. And there he is again, the great disruptor, Donald Trump, which I was shocked that he pulled it off. And boy, did he pull it off better than he did in 2016.
Yes, actually, really good points, actually. I mean, one needs to kind of bring it back to basics. Essentially, how does the average guy outside of the DC bubble look at things? And as you rightly point out, it wasn't what the Democrats were thinking. Now, on you mentioned 2016, one of the big things we're all trying to contend with, when I speak to investors every day, is how different will this Trump administration be compared to 2016? So all of us are thinking, okay, should we just use the 2016 playbook and just fast forward it to today? Or is there something different that Trump's going to do, or the way he's going to run things, or types of policies?
This, I think, is really important from a market perspective. And I think a lot of folks in the markets are missing this. I don't say this is Trump 2.0. Get rid of that idea. This is Trump 4.0 or 5.0, right? This is 4 years marred by COVID. It would have been interesting to see if we didn't have COVID, would he have gotten reelected or not? We'll never know. But this is a man who spent the last 4 years not going back to his business. He wasn't running the Trump organization. His sons are doing that, right? This is 4 years, and we will see this in history. And I know it for a fact from people who work for him and around him, who studied government, who studied, quite frankly, why did he fail in his first term? This is a guy too, and I know this from people who actually were standing with him on that election night in 2016, who could hear him swearing under his breath when the election results came in, because he was shocked that he won. So he wasn't prepared, right? And he didn't know who to hire, and he ended up getting a lot of bad eggs around him. His disloyalty thing is true, because there were, I'm going to be blunt, grifters and con men that came in and out of there. And he had problems trying to identify these people. Okay, that was one. So who could he find that could serve him? Now, hopefully we'll talk about the cabinet, because it seems to be a kind of a mixed bunch there, but there's some very competent people coming in. And it's going to be very important on the secondary level. Okay, so back to the point. He studied what failed, what do I need to do when I run again? And also, what does the 4 years look like? Because he's a lame duck. He can't run for re-election. So this guy is like a hypersonic missile at this point. This is massive, rapid nominations of people to all of his cabinet. He's almost got it all filled out. He's already going to the sub-cabinet level, which can be just as important, if not more important, right? Those are the really hardworking guys who are out there getting it done. And I would argue in the next 2 to 3 weeks, certainly before Christmas, do not be surprised if he has hammered out with the Republican leadership in the House and Senate, who will be sworn in January 3rd. The new Congress takes place January 3rd, key date here, the tax bill and the budget bill, which they'll use the reconciliation. I say this because the hypersonic missile analogy, he has been telling people inside the transition, we don't have 4 years, we have 2. Because in 2 years, we could A, lose control of one or both chambers of Congress, and also he's not running again. In 2 years, the American public starts debating who's going to succeed him. Now, he's not going to step quietly off the stage, ever, until he's passed and gone on to the next life, right? But he understands he's got 2 years to get everything done. So he has mapped this out and he is moving. And I would also argue there's something more, there's a calmness to him that you're seeing a little bit more. You've got to really study it, right? He's not out there tweeting nasty insults all the time, much more policy focused, but he wants to come in and have a huge change. Key dates for markets: January 3rd, Congress gets sworn in. January 20th, he gets sworn in. I know for a fact he's already pressuring Republican leadership. Hey, great, you guys have that swearing in ceremony January 3rd. Do that in the morning, and in the afternoon, I want you to start voting and confirming, which is going to be impossible to do. They'll have to do committee hearings, but at least do the committee hearings on the confirmation of my entire cabinet and start moving on the tax and budget reconciliation bill. I want these things on my desk on January 20th. We've never seen anything like that. Most cabinet people get confirmed. You're into March, April, even June before the cabinet's finalized. No. I want it done now. So that's what 4.0. He's a lot smarter.
So it is fundamentally different from what you say. I mean, from what you say, to make total sense. Now, in terms of his cabinet appointees, should we go through some of the key ones? Maybe we can start with the Treasury Secretary. The market seems to have liked Bessent. Maybe we'll start with him, and then we can go through the rest of the cabinet. What are your thoughts?
Look, I think very smart. I think he went through something of running the gauntlet with Trump. Trump, I think, puts more of a premium on Secretary of Treasury than any other role, which is interesting, right? Because of all the things going on in the world, you'd think Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense. No, he clearly, Bessent went through that. He likes him a lot, and it means a lot for Trump. So, look, I think that's going to be very important. It's going to be very interesting to see who's the deputy. Who's the undersecretary for domestic finance overseeing the treasury markets, right? Who goes into the tax role? Those are key roles, but Bessent and the reception in Washington so far with Bessent is overwhelmingly positive.
Okay, yeah. Okay, that's good. So I mean, the running the gauntlet, a lot of people thought that was Trump being, like reactive to situations, but you're view that more as a kind of stress testing different candidates rather than flip-flopping between, he had a conversation with this person, so he's going with this person. It's not like that. It's actually something more rigorous.
He spent time with everybody, and I mean time, not like an hour-long meeting. It's like, hey, I'm going to go look at the border. I have to do something in New York. Why don't you fly with me? He'd spend 8-12 hours in a day with them, right? Howard Lutnick certainly did that way. Was it Mark Rowan from Apollo? Senator Bill Hagerty, who's a very smart former private equity guy that he gave significant consideration to, and there were others. He spent a lot of time with them.
Okay, yeah. And then, well, you mentioned Lutnick. He's at Commerce. What's the significance of that appointment? I mean, I'm not as aware of some of these posts, what they do exactly. So Commerce, Lutnick, I mean, what's the significance of that? I mean, Lutnick, from my understanding, is very close to Trump. He's part of the transition sort of team, and so he's a significant figure. So Commerce, why put him there?
It was a runner-up thing.
Okay.
But I would also argue for Trump, where we're going on tariffs or the threat of tariffs, all the tariffs are announced and implemented at the Commerce Department. So the Commerce Department is one of the biggest, and hopefully we will talk about DOGE, right? But it is one of the fattest, most ridiculous agencies in some ways, right? It's got the National Weather Service. It's got a giant aquarium, public aquarium in its basement. Well, why? I couldn't tell you. It's just everything, but it's the trade side. And so This is very interesting. Now, a lot of people will say, what does Ludnick know about trade? Probably not. He's not a trade lawyer. And that's an interesting aspect, because normally you would get somebody like that. But he's a bond guy, and he is very sensitive to inflation, right? He is sort of, if he was a hunting dog, he would be a very good one, because that's sniffing out of inflation, which is the big fear of tariffs and how this could be potentially impactful, and his connections to the markets reacting to that. So I think that has been underplayed a lot, and I think that's a strength that he's going to bring to it. It's got all sorts of other stuff that they do. Again, it's just this Byzantine, ridiculously huge place, but the key things are on trade.
Okay. And then I guess related to trade, the trade rep, we have Greer, who's like a protege of Lighthizer, from what I can tell. Is that like Lighthizer light, so to speak? So Lighthizer philosophy there, or is that something different?
No, I think he's very much Lighthizer light, if you will. And I no disrespect for him. I mean, Bob Lighthizer had quite a storied career in Washington. He sat on the Senate Finance Committee as the staffer writing trade law for years. And then he went to a huge law firm in Washington. He was the trade lawyer. There was nobody, no peers. And that's when he came in and worked for Trump, right? So it's a storied, amazing background to him. Greer doesn't have that. Greer, I think, is 44 years old, but he's seen a lot, certainly under Lighthizer and the counsel of him. By the way, just even jump ahead, I don't know where Bob has gone. A lot of people thought he'd get Treasury or Commerce, even
That's a good point.
And he's just dropped off the map, and I don't know what that is. And talking to the Trump transition people, there seems to be no falling out between him and the president. So I just hope it's not a health issue or something, but he's just not there. And I don't see any other major roles for him to step into at this point, unless there's something else external he wants to put him up for, some international body. But yeah, so Greer is going to be a guy who knows how this works. And as chief of staff under Lighthizer, knows where it doesn't work, right? The chief of staff will always run. So it's a nice combination there. I think he will surprise to the upside.
Okay, so that's kind of the econ team. And then we have on state, we have Rubio. He's a perfectly reasonable candidate. I mean, some people viewed him as being a neocon. People are throwing these terms around, and people thought Trump was less of a neocon. What do you read into the Rubio appointment?
Well, one, having somebody who knows everybody in the Senate, he gets along with just about everybody. I've dealt with Marco for years. And, in our old employer, Deutsche Bank, we had huge operations in Florida, and we were always interacting with him. Look, I think what's interesting is, and maybe we should take a step back here on all the cabinet appointments. And let me just say this. Growing up, cabinet members it was a big deal. They made policy, they implemented, right? They were like the presidents of major divisions talking to that's not the case anymore, right? This is as if McKinsey came in and said, okay, get rid of all the presidents and everybody, you, the CEO, run all the divisions. Nobody's going to be making policy. Donald Trump's going to be making policy on everything, right? And I would say Treasury, though he's going to be very deferential, I think, to Bessent, because there are certain aspects of the markets he's just not that guy, and he gets it, and he's wary of it, which is a smart thing to be. But on foreign policy, on defense, on trade, that's all Trump, right? So here's the order of battle: execute, march, go. That being said, I think there are going to be areas that are going to be very important, which Rubio is going to bring attention to, that have become very timely and have been ignored. For whatever reason, I don't understand why the Biden administration ignored Latin America, because Biden was so focused on it in his first administration. In fact, he asked Obama to name him the czar of Latin America, and he spent more time there than any president or vice president in history of the United States, and then becomes president and then promptly ignores it, which doesn't make sense to me. I think maybe he was caught up with Ukraine. Who knows? Rubio's not that way. So I think you're going to see in this move towards control of critical minerals, interacting, trying to blunt the impact of China in the region. This is going to be big because Rubio, a child of Cuban emigres, Spanish speaking, and has been very focused on the hemisphere throughout his entire political career. That's going to be something he's going to get a lot of room to run on. And I think that's going to be very interesting from a market perspective. Again, the critical minerals, the investment, we're coming up on USMCA being renegotiated. He'll be a critical player on that. So I think that's going to be a net positive. And again, his interaction with the Senate on getting anything done, whether it's even trade deals. And by the way, let's remember, Trump got a number of trade deals done in his first administration. Biden did zero, right? Trump got USMCA, he got US South Korea, and he started one with US UK, which he apparently wants to start up again. So he loves those bilaterals. Rubio will be important on all of that.
Yeah. And then on defense, we have Hegseth. Now, he's the one which is throwing people off a bit. He just doesn't seem qualified for that position. Obviously, we had Gates as well, but that's fallen through. But Hegseth, I mean, it's hard beyond being a TV presenter. I mean, how do you think about an appointment like that?
I'm mystified. And I think I know everybody that I talked around Washington is kind of like, and there's some of the, right, he's got, I think, 3-4 of the cabinet, Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Transportation, Hegseth, Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and there's one other. Oh, and Tulsi Gabbard. They're TV talkers. They're not policy people. What's going on here? I think to him and with these others, there's an element of Trump. Again, Trump's going to be the policy guy. He's making the decisions, right, on the big picture issues. He went out and got a bunch of people who are really good at arguing about a position on television. They are messengers. This is an evolution of cabinet officials. I don't want you sitting there thinking you're making policy. I'm making policy. Get out there and sell, 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 sell. And I think that's one of the reasons he chose him, thought he would be very good at it, and some of these other folks as well. It'll be interesting to see who goes in as the deputy secretary, because, right, that's your chief operating officer and also your CFO. And the two people under consideration are the founder and CEO of Cerberus, and also Founders, Peter Thiel's firm, one of the major partners there, right? Guys who really know how to cut budgets, be more effective, and believe it or not, actually, both of them know quite about defense, these very complicated defense systems, budgets. So that's going to be interesting. Again, I'm looking at this, and I'm not trying to be Pollyannish, but I think if I'm trying to get in Trump's head, again, he's hired some very high-level spokespeople, very high-level salespeople. Then underneath, you're putting in people who can really drill in, rip things apart, make it better.
Okay, yep. I can see that. That logic kind of makes sense. So the rung below is going to be very important in terms of who he appoints. Now, how about DOGE? I mean, DOGE isn't a genuine department, but you have Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, who are going to come in and make things more efficient. Is this just some random marketing thing, or will they actually be able to do something real or not?
So there's a historical correlation to this, and it goes back to Reagan. So I'm glad you asked that question earlier. Reagan tried to do a variation of this, where he created a government efficiency and W.R. Grace Company, and he asked old man Grace to do the same thing. And Congress, which was controlled by Democrats, were like, we're not giving him a penny, right? We're not doing this. So he actually went out into the private sector, raised money to create this Grace Commission, where they looked at what could be privatized, what could be closed down, how do we be more efficient? I don't know what the percentage is. I'd be surprised if it was 20%, even 10% actually got executed on, and they did it. And there was a number of privatizations that came out of this, and it was fascinating to see how well that worked. I think you're going to see the variation of this, right? That these guys can self-fund. They have no office space. They have no staff. They are literally consultants to the president appointed in that way, right? but they're smart guys and they've got a lot of people around them, and they can also sell the product at the end of the day. Musk is saying $2 trillion. I look at the Department of Defense, which has failed for 7 years getting an audit and cannot account for over $870 billion. Wow. Okay. Let's figure that out. Now, the real test, though, is do they get into entitlements? Because that's what's really, weighing down the U.S. In terms of the deficit and everything else. Do they touch Social Security reform? Do they do something on Medicare? Do they talk about the Highway Trust Fund, which is supposed to go bankrupt, right? And that's how we rebuild our federal highways here, right? It's allocated proportionally to every state. That's going to go bankrupt in 2 or 3 years, apparently. Do they get into those red hot areas and make suggestions? That I don't know. And I don't know how they ignore it, but they haven't touched it yet. So I think it will have impact. It'll be just a question of how far they go.
Okay, now let's talk a bit more about policy itself. You mentioned Jan 3rd, Congress gets into action. Trump, you said, wants a tax and spending bill to be put before. So, how will the budget look, for the first year? During the election, Trump made a whole bunch of promises, including making Social Securities tax deductible, removing taxes from tips, for example. So there was a lot of, things that were going to hurt the revenue side. He will have tariffs that kind of bounces things up a bit, but there's some big cuts coming. So how will the bill look?
I think it's going to look a lot like it was in 2017. They are debating and actually working on it now. They were doing it the week before Thanksgiving here. They were off all last week. The discussion among Republican leadership was, do we extend it 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years? And that's what they were fighting over, right? And of course, big cost differentials. I think that there's going to be some interesting stuff on commercial real estate, right? Because of the huge shifts that we've seen in commercial real estate post-COVID. Is there something that they can do tax-wise? Watch for that. I think these other things are going to be interesting to see where Trump plants the flag and doesn't just let it go as a silly campaign promise, right? He did this on the SALT caps, the state and local tax deduction aspect. He's the guy that took them away in 2017. And part of it was to get at Democratic states that voted against him. All these, he saw it as all these wealthy people getting all the benefits, but then electing a bunch of liberal Democrats who voted against him. Okay, now he's for lifting the caps. Do they get that done? The funny thing is things like tips. And
just to be clear, can you explain what the SALT caps are to audience who aren't as aware of what they are?
You can tell I'm a swamp creature here. I get so nerdy on it. It's the amount of money that you can deduct, how much of your state and local taxes you can deduct from your federal income tax, right? Used to be total. Now there's a cap, and it's hurt a lot of people. More middle class, maybe even upper middle class. And one of the biggest opponents to all of this has actually been the progressive Democrats like Senator Bernie Sanders and others who say, no, these SALT caps are good. And if you take them away, it's only going to benefit the rich. So that's actually where you find the opposition to reforming at this point. But back to these other issues, I think a lot of us sort of giggled when Trump was in Nevada, in Las Vegas, and saying, I'm going to take away, I'm going to make tips tax deductible. He's never going to get that done. I don't know. If you're thinking politically, and this is the difference with Trump, because he understands he can shift the politics of a state for years to come with a policy like this, right? Nevada has been traditionally, it's very union. Clark County, which is Vegas, that's where everybody lives in Reno or Vegas, right? And there's a heavy union presence. He makes this pitch, he won the state. You want to keep that state Republican? You know what? I'm going to be the guy that makes tips tax deductible. And he fights like hell and forces the Republicans to accept it. So we could see some things like this happen that everybody's sort of scoffing at, that he just, takes a stand, we're going to do it. Some of these other things, I don't know. We have to wait and see how hard he wants to come out and live up to those promises. Normally, any other politician, they were simple promises to try and get votes, say, I tried to do it, but Congress held me up. I'll try again next year. I think this is different this time.
Okay, great. And then the other big one is tariffs. Last time he had sort of select tariffs against different countries. During his campaign, he talked about a universal tariff against all countries, which is what's concerning markets people. That if he imposes a 5 or 10% tariff on the world, that's a bad situation. What do you think he's going to do on tariffs?
I do think that he's heard in talking to some of his economic transition folks. He understands that if he did that right out of the box, it'd be significantly inflationary. And that he got elected, as we talked about earlier, inflation was something he felt and understood. I think this is a threat. It's an opening bid for the most part. I also think that people are sort of missing who's in his ear, right? You look at Elon Musk sitting there. 25% of Teslas are manufactured in China. Do you really want to put a 60% tariff on China, or do you want to negotiate something? So the chatter we hear, there's discussion of maybe going to President Xi with a grand bargain. We can actually start pulling off some of the tariffs. Oh, by the way, why don't you buy some more of our oil and gas? We can cut you a deal on exports of oil and gas. But here's what we need you to do, President Xi. You're the biggest trade partner with Iran. We need you to choke them off because they are the cancer of the Middle East, causing so much trouble. Whoa, that's sort of mind-bending, right? Those discussions are actually happening in Mar-a-Lago. So is there something to be done there? The EU, let's see. I think this is a very different EU. I think there's an affinity with Meloni in Italy. If Friedrich Merz is elected, the head of the CDU in Germany, as the next chancellor, I know Friedrich, I've known him for 30 years. He's got strong ties into the Trump campaign. Is there a new friendship that blossoms out of a CDU chancellorship, right? Some of these other countries as well. So let's see what he does there. I think there's going to be some stuff he'll go after. By the way, and I don't see him trying to pull out of NATO. That's not going to happen just as a subset of this, because you talk Europe, everybody, he's not going to do it. And he can't legally. Congress has now passed legislation that you need 2/3 of the House and Senate to approve a withdrawal from NATO, and that will never happen. Okay. Other countries, again, do you go to, I'm just making this up, what do you do with an Indonesia or a Malaysia, which has critical minerals, right? Again, when you're thinking David Sachs and Elon Musk and these other, Mark Andreessen and other tech guys in his ear saying, what do we need to build America great again? It's semiconductors and it's technology, and we need these critical assets. Do we really want to bludgeon these people just blindly, or do we have deals to cut? And I think that's what the markets aren't thinking. What is it that we really need? What does Trump see that we really need to build back better, make America greater, blah, 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 particularly in the tech sector, and who's in his ear? You match that up and you look around at sort of emerging markets and investment opportunities. I think you can kind of map out the pretty interesting outline.
And, he did send out a truth on his platform about Canada and Mexico, as well as China, about, tariffs on them. What do you think the relation will be like with the NAFTA or USMCA countries, Canada and Mexico?
I think, to the critical minerals piece, Canada is the most natural, unbelievably rich, and all of those things that we need to make electric Teslas or anything else, right? It was fascinating to see how quickly Prime Minister Trudeau flew to Mar-a-Lago. And I think that's mostly because he's in political trouble, right? His chances of being reelected are pretty slim at this point. And you could see a conservative majority coming into Canada. I have to wonder if Trump's trying to play that card because he could deal with those folks a lot better. Mexico's a wild card. President Sheinbaum is pretty defiant. And there's a lot going on down there from a market perspective that is not friendly, that's beyond the trade side, which I think is really going to hurt USMCA, right? It's taking away the independence of the judiciary, which they just did. And it's fascinating to see how scared businesses, multinational corporations are about that. And now they've just passed legislation that's getting rid of all of the independent bodies, including the antitrust agency down there and others. This has got corporates very nervous. How does that, why would you go in there to invest. And President Sheinbaum is pretty defiant about that. So let's see how that plays out. I can't read that one at all. And by the way, one last thing I'll say about this. Notice that it started with the Conservative Party in Canada and quickly echoed by Prime Minister Trudeau himself, publicly saying, you know what, let's just kick Mexico out. It's more important the US and Canada have a bilateral. Wow. So you have President Sheinbaum in a press conference today going after Trudeau, right? There's this war that's broken out between Canada and Mexico over the future of USMCA. You have to think Trump is going to play that to his advantage every which way. So last thing I'll say about it, sorry, Bill, I'm babbling on here, but this is his child. He created USMCA out of NAFTA. I think he has got a lot of pride in it, and I think he'd like to see it stay. But if Mexico makes this too hard for him, he'll dump them.
And speaking of Mexico, obviously there was a lot about undocumented or illegal immigrants in the US over the campaign. Trump has banded out in really big numbers about how many he wants to kick out of the US. What do you think on that? I mean, again, people in markets are thinking, okay, if you eject, say, 10 million people, I mean, that will have quite a big impact on the economy in all sorts of different ways.
I don't see it happening. And I am, as they say, dark Irish, right? I'm always eternal pessimist who can find a dark cloud on an otherwise cloudless day. I don't see how he does it. I don't see how Congress appropriates the money for him to do that. I don't think there's the personnel to go around and do it. Police forces aren't going to do it, right? They're not even empowered in most districts. So you get into some very big legal. And the other thing is, if he tries to do it, we'll be in the courts for 4 years battling over, can you deport these people or not? Oh, by the way, they've had children here. Now they're U.S. citizen. This gets, so where I think Trump goes is very loudly and very clearly starts rounding up the criminal element, right? It is that 1%, 0.5%, whatever. We certainly see it in the news here constantly. Murderers, rapists, gangs that have shown up from Venezuela, round them all up, and we're sending them out. And he's making America safer again. I think that's the threshold. And I think beyond that, everybody else is kind of okay with the large number of illegals here. For the most part, some folks in the Midwest not happy about it because now they're competing. He also won a large number of the Latino vote that is here. They're not happy about it, right? They spent years and a lot of money to get their green card or citizenship. And there's how many illegals here? This is one of the reasons he won is, and that's a huge one. So he's got to be careful about that because there's constituencies who expect this. But I think at the baseline, all he can do is really go out there and get anybody who's committed a crime.
Okay, that makes sense. And I did want to ask you about the Fed. Again, another sort of area of concern is that Trump will somehow interfere with the Fed, force them to cut rates or do something or meddle with the independence of the central bank. What do you think there?
Substance and style. Substance being, will he force the Fed to cut rates or raise rates? No, I don't think so. Look, he knows Jay Powell's out in May of 2026. Jay Powell, I think, interestingly enough, over the last year has been operating with the assumption that this is his swan song. He's done then, right? He knew Trump, if Trump was going to be elected, wasn't going to reappoint him. He also knew that Biden probably was going to put his own person in there to put his stamp on the Fed. And then when Kamala Harris came in, he knew 100% he wasn't going to be staying on his Fed chair because a lot of people didn't realize she had led the fight in the U.S. Senate against his confirmation. And she was one of 9 senators voted against him. So he has been just happily doing what he felt was best, as independent as any Fed we've ever seen, because he knew, I'm going to bring it in for a soft landing as I can. I'm out of here in May. I'll take a bow. I'll drop the mic. I'm off the stage, right? So I think he's operated that way. I would expect this from a market perspective. You will hear with every bad economic report going forward, Trump will bash Powell. He will take it to the limit because it's that guy's fault. Never mind that Trump was the guy who put him in there in the first place, right? He's the ultimate punching bag for the next 2 years. Why would you get rid of him? No. it's always that guy's fault and not mine. And we've seen enough of Trump in the first iteration. We know that's how he operates. So yes, I think he will not force anything. And by the way, looking at the rest of the Fed, there is nobody coming off the Fed. I think it's Kugler is the only other one who's up for coming off. I think that's January of 26, and everybody else pretty much just got there. I don't see them leaving.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to round off with some geopolitics. Obviously, there's three major potential or current hotspots. There's Russia, Ukraine. We have the Middle East with Israel's conflict with various different countries, and then we have potentially China, Taiwan. So, what are your thoughts on how the U.S. or the Trump administration will deal with each one of those?
On Ukraine, the consensus has been broadly, and I think it's stale now, that he would abandon Ukraine. Two things I'd point to. One, that impromptu visit 3 weeks before the election. He flew to New York to meet with Zelensky. Ukrainian President Zelensky was in for the UN week. And if you go back and look at the video, it was very friendly and warm. This guy's a great guy. Blah, blah, blah. It's typical Trump. And Zelensky's beaming. I think more importantly, what was not widely reported or focused on, the day after the US election, Trump picked up the phone and called Zelensky. And, I was trying to get sleep. I don't know how Trump at 78 is doing this. The guy doesn't sleep ever, literally. And he put Elon Musk on, and people sort of laughed at that. But they didn't understand it. And if you go back and if you look at the corresponding timeline of tweets from Zelensky, I just had a great conversation with President Trump, blah, blah. The importance of it is Starlink. And I have reason to believe that Trump, as the incoming commander-in-chief, had told Elon Musk, you may authorize the Ukrainians to use Starlink for offensive purposes. The policy of the US government had been, until several weeks ago, right? You can't attack inside Russia, only as a retaliatory. If you can, geolocate where the missile came from, you can do that. No. Taking the leash off the dog. Now you have Starlink, and I'm here to say to you, says Elon Musk, the incoming commander-in-chief gave me permission, go for it. So I think that was absolutely enormous. I also think that Trump realizes Putin is not somebody he can deal with in the traditional commercial sense. Anybody else, President Xi, anybody else, there's a deal to be had. No. All Putin wants to do is destroy America, right? His ultimate game was to rip up the social and political fabric of America, and he used Trump both ways. Through all of his various use of social media and everything else, and Trump gets it, right? There's not rejoicing in Moscow over Trump coming in, and I think Trump does want to cut a deal, and he's going to force it. And it's interesting to see even today that Putin has come back out and said, "Hey, all this stuff Trump's talking about, we can talk about peace in Ukraine, but we got to talk about other things around the world as part of this deal." What? So I think Putin's got his back to the wall, and Bilal, you better than me, and I think it'd be a fascinating conversation in of itself. The Russian economy seems to be stalling out, and real problems here, right? So I think that we're going to get to some sort of negotiation. It's probably 6 months to a year, and who knows how long it's going to be. But I think there's something serious there. In the Middle East, look, Trump clearly has Netanyahu's back, even though there's been a complicated relationship there. He never forgave Netanyahu for calling 4 weeks after the election in 2020 to congratulate Biden. And there was not a lot of love there. That has been patched over. And I'd even note that Netanyahu's wife was in Mar-a-Lago having dinner with Trump last night, taking pictures together. I don't know what that was about. But there's a big shift here. And if anybody, had a very bad night globally, election night, it was the guys in Tehran, because they had authorized a hit team to go kill Trump, this was public information, U.S. Justice Department and the FBI arrested 3 days after the election, a 4-man hit team. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot to call those guys back. This is not good, right? Trump, I think, would really like to see regime change in Tehran. That's a big deal. And by the way, there's everybody quietly cheering that on in the Middle East, right? The Saudis, UAE, they're sick of them too. And seeing what's happening in Syria, which is a huge black eye for Iran. So there's a lot moving here. okay, it's all fascinating, but from a market perspective, I don't see any huge shifts unless we finally get to the threshold of regime change in Iran. What does that do to the oil markets? I don't know, but keep an eye on it.
And then China, Taiwan?
My views are that there's low risk. I know that's not consensus, right? I'm at like 15% chance in the next 5 years for a number of reasons. One, China saw what the sanctions did to Russia, and we don't really import anything from Russia, right? But it still is hurting them now. The sanctions, global sanctions, if there was any sort of kinetic event going after Taiwan, would be devastating at a time when China, as you explained so much eloquently than I do, it would be devastating to them. Also, he'd have to explain internally, why are you killing Chinese? He refers, right? Why are you killing our brothers and sisters? I think he's just going to keep the pressure at maximum level. And he got that advantage when the then Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, visited. He grabbed that leverage to really go higher in terms of demanding and threatening. But I don't see that event happening at this point. And I think, again, Trump can step in here. And this could be part of a grand bargain of how do we improve relationships between the island and Beijing. I'd watch that space. That could be interesting.
Okay, well, we've covered a huge amount of ground. I don't think I've missed anything important, have I? Or is there anything else on your mind that we haven't talked about?
I think the big question is what is the thing that happens in the first 3 months of a presidency that nobody ever sees? Because there's always something. Does North Korea do something stupid? It's just an idea, right? Just a thought, right? Does something else happen globally that isn't even directed at the U.S. that becomes a major market concern, which therefore forces the President of the United States to react in some way? I don't know what that could be. I don't see anything. I think, the hottest of hot spots have been that way, and they're not necessarily going to change. But it's going to be that sort of sucker punch. There's going to be something weird, and something always tests the president. So I think that's the only other thing I can think of.
Okay, no, that sounds good. I did want to round off with a couple of more sort of personal questions. One was, we do have some young people listening to the podcast. Many of them, are at college or have left college and soon to leave college. What advice would you give to youngsters who are about to or soon to enter the real world?
Two things. One, no matter where you came out of university, how your grades were, what people may be channeling you, literally go for your dream. If a guy who graduated 389 out of a class of 306 and was being pushed to diesel mechanical school 4 years later can end up being a writer for the President of the United States, being in the presence of Ronald Reagan regularly, you can too, right? That's one thing I'd say. So don't be discouraged. There's always the comeback story. We all have that opportunity. The second thing is be personable. Get out and talk to people. I think in the age of AI and social media, and I certainly see this when I'm talking to younger people, I teach at Catholic University School of Business in Washington. Get out and look people in the eye. Have a conversation with them. Ask for a cup of coffee. Ask for that informational interview. I just would love your advice. You can't believe what that will do for you, because people are doing it less and less, and people are starving for it simultaneously, right? You see these statistics, Gallup and others, 1 in 4 people in America feel very lonely. People want to engage with each other, but we're imprisoning ourselves with social media or reliance on AI. They're all fine. Go shake somebody's hand, look them in the eye, smile, and ask for their advice and be humble about it. And it will catapult you professionally. I'm telling you, through your entire career.
Absolutely. Fantastic advice there. I did want to ask you about books. I see you have some books behind you as well. I mean, what are some of the books that have influenced you over your career?
Well, this is my addiction. I'm getting help for it. My wife's 14. I think I have close to 4,000 books in this house.
Wow.
Yeah, I was self-taught, right? That was the only reason it opened up the doors for me. A couple of thoughts. I love Animal Farm by George Orwell. Everybody looks at that and thinks, okay, this is just communism, Marxism. But there's variations of it, right? There's a lot to learn there about how businesses work, how they fail. It's a great book you can always go back to. Stephen Pressfield's has written some great books, particularly, Gates of Fire, which I loved. It's a novel about the defense by the Spartans, which is just brilliantly written. It's now required reading in every military academy. I read it when it first came out, and I love it. I go back. And the last one is one of my all-time favorite, The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt by Edmund Morris. It is the single greatest political biography I've ever read. And it takes you from the background of Teddy Roosevelt, privilege in New York, right up to the moment when he's out on a picnic in New York with his family, thinking his political career is over because he's just the vice president of the United States. And the two Secret Service guys come over the hill to say, you're the president because President McKinley's been killed. And then it's just, you get chills reading it. It's just a fantastic book.
That's fantastic. And finally, what's the best way for people to learn more about yourself and also the business or the service that you offer?
Thank you very much for that. That's very kind of you. Look, it's www.fulcrummacro.com. You can find me there. You can sign up for my newsletters for free. Do a geopolitical week ahead that looking at the markets and economic data and political around the world broken down by region. I do other reports, and you can get my email there as well. And happy to chat. And if I can be of any help to any of you, please let me know.
Okay, that's been fantastic. We're super comprehensive, super insightful. So thanks a lot, Frank. That's been fantastic. And, good luck with everything for the rest of this year and obviously for 2025 as well.
And to you too, my friend. Thank you so much. Such an honor to be here today, talking with you.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please subscribe to the podcast show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Leave a 5-star rating, a nice comment, and let other people know about the show. We'd be super grateful. Finally, sign up for our free newsletter at macrohive.com/free. That's macrohive.com/free. We'll be back soon, so tune in then.